I'm Emma, 26, and what started as Christmas morning euphoria turned into the most devastating family betrayal I'd ever experienced. While my sister unwrapped a brand new BMW with a giant red bow in our driveway, I stared at a crumpled envelope containing exactly $2. Not 200. 2. The look of smug satisfaction on my parents' faces, as they watched my world crumble, told me everything I needed to know about where I truly stood in this family. That moment didn't just shatter my heart, it ignited a fire that would ultimately expose decades of favoritism and lead to consequences none of them saw coming. Before we dive into this wild journey of family karma, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story that proves sometimes the best revenge is living well, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because trust me, you won't want to miss how this golden child dynamic completely backfires on my parents. Now, let's get into the mess that changed everything. Growing up in the wealthy suburbs of Connecticut, I should have seen the signs earlier, but love makes you blind to even the most obvious patterns. My sister Madison, 3 years younger, had always been the crown jewel of our family. While I excelled academically, graduating valedictorian and earning a full scholarship to Stanford, Madison barely scraped by with CS and spent most of high school partying. Yet somehow, her mediocrity was constantly celebrated while my achievements were met with lukewarm acknowledgement. The pattern was insidious and consistent. When I made Dean's List every semester, my parents would nod and change the subject. When Madison passed a basic math test, they'd take her out for expensive dinners and post about it on social media like she'd discovered the cure for cancer. I told myself it was because I was older, more independent, that they knew I didn't need as much validation. I convinced myself that their love was just expressed differently toward each of us. But the financial disparity was impossible to ignore. Madison's college tuition, room, and board were paid in full despite her choosing an expensive private school, where she barely maintained a 2.5 GPA. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs throughout college to cover my living expenses, even with my academic scholarship. When Madison wanted to study abroad in Europe for a semester, they handed her a credit card with a $15,000 limit. When I asked for help buying textbooks, they suggested I apply for more loans. The excuses were always ready. Emma's so responsible, she doesn't need our help, they'd say, as if my responsibility was a burden rather than something to be proud of. Madison needs more guidance, they'd explain, as if throwing money at her problems was guidance. I watched them buy her a brand new laptop when she spilled coffee on her old one, while I nursed my ancient computer through 4 years of college with duct tape and prayers. After graduation, while I landed a competitive position at a tech startup and worked 18-hour days to prove myself, Madison moved back home rent-free and worked part-time at a boutique owned by my mother's friend. Her job was basically showing up when she felt like it and posting Instagram stories about the clothes. Yet our parents constantly praised her entrepreneurial spirit and people skills, while treating my actual career success as expected and unremarkable. The emotional manipulation was subtle but constant. When I'd express frustration about the inequity, they'd gasify me with phrases like "you're being dramatic," or "you're just jealous of your sister's social abilities." They'd remind me how lucky I was to be so naturally driven, while poor Madison struggled with motivation. They painted my success as effortless while portraying Madison's bare minimum as heroic effort. Every family gathering became a showcase for Madison's minor accomplishments, while my major ones were glossed over. When I got promoted to senior developer and received a substantial raise, the conversation lasted 30 seconds before pivoting to Madison's new Instagram following. When Madison got a participation trophy at her yoga class, it was front-page news in the family newsletter. I started documenting these instances, not out of malice, but because I began questioning my own sanity. Was I really being dramatic? Was I imagining the disparity? But the evidence was overwhelming. Photos from family events where Madison was always in the center, social media posts celebrating her mediocre achievements while mine went unmentioned, financial records that showed a staggering imbalance in parental investment. The most painful part wasn't the money, or even the attention, it was the gradual erosion of my self-worth. I began to internalize their narrative that my accomplishments were expected, that I didn't deserve celebration or support because success came easily to me. I worked harder and harder, achieving more and more, desperately hoping that someday I'd do something impressive enough to earn the kind of pride and joy they showered on Madison for simply existing. By the time I turned 26, I'd built a successful career, paid off my student loans, and even started investing in real estate. But I still felt like I was constantly auditioning for my parents' approval, competing against someone who didn't even have to try. I thought things might change as we got older, that they'd eventually recognize the pattern and try to balance things out. I couldn't have been more wrong about what was coming. December 2023 arrived with unusual fanfare from my parents. For the first time in years, they insisted we spend Christmas at home instead of our usual low-key gathering. My mother called me repeatedly, emphasizing how important it was that both Madison and I be there for a very special Christmas morning. Her excitement was infectious, and despite my complicated feelings about family gatherings, I found myself genuinely looking forward to it. The build-up was intense and deliberate. My father, typically reserved about gifts, kept dropping hints about big surprises and life-changing presents. My mother posted cryptic messages on Facebook about dreams coming true and the best Christmas ever. Madison seemed unusually excited too, texting me constantly about how crazy Christmas morning was going to be. For the first time in years, I felt included in their excitement rather than watching it from the sidelines. I decided to go all out for everyone. Using a significant portion of my savings, I bought my parents a luxury vacation package to Italy, something they'd mentioned wanting for years, but never splurged on. For Madison, I got a professional photography package with an up-and-coming photographer whose work she'd been admiring on social media. These weren't just expensive gifts, they were thoughtful, personal investments in their happiness. I was proud of my choices and excited to see their reactions. The week leading up to Christmas, my mother's behavior became almost manic with anticipation. She deep-cleaned the house twice, decorated beyond her usual standards, and kept mentioning how she couldn't wait for everyone to see. My father was uncharacteristically involved in the preparations, making mysterious phone calls and trips to the garage. Even Madison helped with decorations without being asked, singing Christmas carols and talking about how magical everything felt. I arrived Christmas Eve to find the house transformed into something from a holiday movie. Every surface gleamed, the tree was picture-perfect, and there was an energy in the air that felt almost electric. My parents seemed giddy, constantly exchanging meaningful looks and barely contained smiles. Madison bounced around like a child, taking selfies and talking about how she couldn't sleep from excitement. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine anticipation for Christmas morning with my family. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe they'd finally recognized the imbalance and were planning something special to show they valued me too. The mysterious hints, the unusual attention to including me in their excitement, the emphasis on both daughters being present, it all seemed to point toward some grand gesture of equalization. I fell asleep feeling hopeful and loved, imagining scenarios where they presented me with something meaningful, not necessarily expensive, but thoughtful and indicative of their recognition of my efforts and achievements. Maybe it would be something related to my career, or acknowledgement of how hard I'd worked to build my life. Maybe they'd arranged something that showed they'd been paying attention to my interests and goals all along. Christmas morning dawned crisp and bright. I woke early, hearing movement and whispered excitement from downstairs. The anticipation was almost unbearable as I showered and dressed, choosing an outfit that struck the right balance between festive and photo-ready. I could hear my father moving around outside, the sound of car doors, and muffled laughter from the kitchen. When I came downstairs, the living room looked like a magazine spread. Presents were artfully arranged under the tree, and my parents stood together wearing matching holiday sweaters, their faces glowing with barely contained excitement. Madison sat on the couch in silk pajamas, her hair perfectly styled despite it being 8 a.m. Everything felt staged, but in the best possible way, like they'd put real effort into making this morning special. Before we start, my mother announced, her voice trembling with emotion, "Your father and I want to say how proud we are of both our daughters. This Christmas is going to be very special." She looked directly at me as she said it, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was the acknowledgement I'd been waiting for, the moment when they'd finally show that they saw and appreciated everything I'd accomplished. The setup was perfect, the anticipation was killing me, and I was completely, utterly unprepared for what was about to happen. "Madison, sweetheart, why don't you go first?" my mother suggested, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. My sister's eyes lit up as she reached for a small box wrapped in elegant silver paper. Inside was a set of car keys attached to a BMW keychain, and the reaction was immediate and explosive. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Madison shrieked, jumping up and down while clutching the keys. "Is this real? Are you serious right now?" My parents were beaming like they'd just witnessed a miracle, and my father gestured grandly toward the front window. "Go look outside, princess," he said, and we all moved toward the door. There, parked in our circular driveway, sat a pristine white BMW X3 with an enormous red bow stretched across the hood. The morning sun reflected off its perfect paint job, and I could see the temporary dealer plate still attached. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a symbol, a declaration of worth that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Madison ran outside in her pajamas and slippers, screaming with joy as she circled the vehicle. She live-streamed the entire thing on Instagram, gushing about her amazing parents and their incredible surprise. My mother and father stood watching through the window, tears in their eyes, completely absorbed in her happiness. The scene was picture-perfect if you ignored the daughter standing frozen in the doorway, trying to process what she was witnessing. "Your turn, honey," my mother said, turning to me with that same excited smile. But something in her expression had shifted subtly. The warmth was still there, but it felt different now, performative rather than genuine. She handed me a small envelope, thin and light in my hands. "We put a lot of thought into this one." My hands shook slightly as I opened it, still trying to reconcile the BMW outside with whatever was about to be revealed. Inside the envelope was a greeting card with generic holiday imagery, not even a family photo or personalized message. And tucked inside that card were 2 crisp dollar bills. Not a joke gift hiding something bigger. Not a placeholder for a surprise yet to come. Just $2, sitting in a Christmas card like some kind of cruel punchline. The silence stretched between us as I stared at the money. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. After the months of build-up, the mysterious hints, the emphasis on how special this Christmas would be, I was holding $2 while my sister danced around a luxury vehicle that cost more than most people's annual salaries. "We know you're so responsible with money," my mother said, her voice suddenly sounding strained. "And you're always saying you don't need material things. So we thought you'd appreciate something practical." The words felt like slaps, each one driving home the message that my financial responsibility and emotional maturity were being weaponized against me. My father nodded sagely, as if this logic made perfect sense. "You're our little saver," he added with a patronizing chuckle. "Madison needs more help getting started in life. You've got everything figured out." The casual dismissal of my needs, my feelings, my very existence as their daughter, was delivered with the same tone they'd used to comment on the weather. I looked back and forth between them, searching for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate joke, or that the real gift was coming next. But their expressions had settled into uncomfortable defensiveness, like they were already preparing to justify their decision. Madison's squeals of delight continued to filter in from outside, a soundtrack to my humiliation. "This is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like an accusation, and I watched my parents exchange a look that confirmed my worst fears. "Emma, don't be dramatic," my mother said, but her tone lacked conviction. "You know we love you both equally. We just express it differently." The familiar gaslighting phrase felt like a knife twist, especially when delivered while Madison's BMW gleamed mockingly through the window. Something crystallized in that moment, not just about this Christmas, but about every birthday, every graduation, every achievement that had been minimized while Madison's failures were celebrated. The $2 weren't just an insult, they were a message. They were my parents' way of telling me exactly what I was worth to them, exactly where I stood in their hierarchy of love. I folded the bills back into the card with hands that had stopped shaking because they'd gone completely numb. 26 years of trying to earn their approval, of telling myself that their love was just expressed differently, of making excuses for their behavior, it all crumbled in that moment. The scales fell from my eyes, and I finally saw my family for what it really was. A dysfunctional system, where I would always be the responsible one, who didn't need anything, while Madison would always be the precious one who deserved everything. The most devastating part wasn't the money, it was the realization that they'd planned this moment. They'd orchestrated this entire morning, built up my hopes intentionally, just to deliver the ultimate reminder of my place in their world. And judging by their defensive postures, they'd expected me to smile and accept it gracefully, to be the mature daughter who understood why her sister needed a BMW while she got pocket change. But they'd miscalculated. They'd pushed their reliable, responsible daughter too far, and they were about to discover that every person has a breaking point. "You know what?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're absolutely right. I don't need material things." I walked deliberately to the beautiful gift bags I'd placed under the tree, the Italy vacation package, and Madison's photography session that had cost me months of savings. Without hesitation, I picked them both up. "Emma, what are you doing?" my mother asked, anxiety creeping into her voice for the first time that morning. "I'm being practical," I replied, echoing her earlier words. "Since material things don't matter to me, I clearly don't need to give any." I walked to the kitchen and dropped both gift bags directly into the trash can, making sure they could hear the decisive thud. The sound seemed to echo through the house, and suddenly Madison's celebration outside felt very far away. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stood frozen, clearly not having anticipated this response. They'd expected tears, maybe an argument they could dismiss as jealousy, but not this cold, calculated rejection of their narrative. I could see them trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. "Emma, don't be childish," my father finally said, but his usual authority was missing. "Those gifts weren't cheap." "Neither was a BMW," I responded. "But apparently my contributions to this family are worth about as much as a candy bar." I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of the scene, the $2 still sitting on the coffee table, the BMW visible through the window, their shocked faces. "I'm documenting this for my therapist. She'll find it very illuminating." That's when the real panic set in. My mother rushed toward the trash can, but I blocked her path. "Don't you dare," I said with a quiet intensity that surprised even me. "You made your choice. You orchestrated this entire morning to remind me of my place in this family." "Well, message received." "You're being ridiculous," my mother protested, but her voice was shaking now. "We can talk about this. Maybe there was a miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. You spent months planning this. You called me repeatedly to make sure I'd be here. You built up the anticipation, emphasized how special it would be. You wanted an audience for Madison's big moment, and you wanted to make sure I knew where I stood. Well, congratulations. Mission accomplished. Madison chose that moment to burst back through the front door, still in her pajamas, but now wearing a BMW baseball cap that had apparently been in the glove compartment. Emma? Did you see my car? Isn't it amazing? I can't believe, she stopped mid-sentence, taking in the tense atmosphere and my parents' pale faces. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, my father said quickly. Emma's just being a little emotional about the gifts. Emotional about what gifts? Madison looked around confused, and her gaze landed on the $2 still sitting on the coffee table. Her expression shifted as she processed the scene. Wait, what did Emma get? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I could see my parents desperately trying to figure out how to explain this in a way that didn't make them look like monsters. But there was no good explanation, and we all knew it. I got exactly what I'm worth to them, I said simply. $2. Madison's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that might have been shame. For a moment, I thought she might actually acknowledge how wrong this was. But then she fell back on old patterns. Well, maybe they thought you didn't want a car, she said weakly. You always say you don't care about material stuff. And right there, watching my sister try to rationalize the unrationalizable, while standing in designer pajamas next to her BMW, something inside me snapped completely. The anger I'd been suppressing for 26 years finally found its voice. But before I tell you what happened next, because trust me, it gets intense, I need to know, have you ever reached that moment where you just can't pretend everything's okay anymore? Drop a comment below about a time when you finally stood up for yourself. And if this story is hitting you in the feels, hit that subscribe button because we are just getting to the good part. The revenge is coming, and it's going to be absolutely perfect. The look on my sister's face when she tried to defend the indefensible told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about my parents anymore. Madison was complicit. She'd known exactly what was happening and had chosen to participate in my humiliation. The entire family system was designed to elevate her while diminishing me, and every single one of them was invested in maintaining that dynamic. You want to know what I want? I asked, my voice gaining strength with each word. I want a family that doesn't measure my worth in dollar amounts. I want parents who don't use my emotional maturity as an excuse to ignore my needs. I want a sister who doesn't stand next to her BMW and tell me I should be grateful for table scraps. I walked to the mantel where family photos displayed our perfect life, Madison in the center of every frame, me pushed to the edges or cropped out entirely. I'd never noticed how deliberate it was before. But most of all, I want to stop pretending that this is normal. That this is love. My mother started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration that I wasn't playing my assigned role. Emma, please. You're ruining Christmas. I'm not ruining anything, I said firmly. I'm finally seeing it clearly. I headed toward the stairs to pack my things, but turned back for one final observation. You know what's funny? You spent so much time and money trying to prop Madison up, you never realized you were raising someone who can't even stand on her own. And you spent so much energy keeping me down, you never noticed I'd already learned to fly. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear them frantically whispering below, probably strategizing how to spin this story to make me look like the ungrateful daughter who couldn't appreciate her parents' love. But I was beyond caring about their narrative. I was finally ready to write my own. Packing my belongings felt like dismantling 26 years of false hope. Every item I placed in my suitcase represented another memory tainted by the realization of how little I'd actually mattered to these people. The baby photos where I was always positioned slightly behind Madison. The school awards that had been relegated to my bedroom, while her participation ribbons were displayed prominently in the living room. The birthday cards with generic messages, while hers overflowed with specific pride and detailed love. As I folded clothes and gathered toiletries, I could hear the heated discussion happening downstairs. My parents' voices were getting louder, though I couldn't make out specific words. Madison's higher pitch occasionally cut through, and I caught fragments like overreacting and always been dramatic. They were workshopping their version of events, the one where I was the problematic daughter who couldn't appreciate their unique way of showing love. But something interesting was happening alongside my anger clarity. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to figure out what I had done wrong or how I could fix this relationship. I wasn't mentally drafting apologies or compromises. I was simply done. The relief that came with that realization was almost overwhelming. I pulled out my phone and started making practical decisions. First, I changed my emergency contacts, removing my parents and replacing them with my best friend Sarah and my cousin Mike, people who had actually shown up for me over the years. Then I updated my address with my bank, insurance company, and employer, making my apartment my permanent address rather than my parents' house as a backup. Next came the harder part, going through my social media and removing family photos. Not out of spite, but because I couldn't bear to look at images that I now understood were elaborate lies. Every family vacation photo where I'd been told to stand in the back. Every holiday picture where my genuine smile masked the growing hurt I'd been trained to suppress. Every birthday post where the comments praised Madison while barely acknowledging my presence. The most painful discovery was a folder on my old laptop filled with college application essays about my loving, supportive family. I'd written passionately about their sacrifices and encouragement, completely believing my own narrative of their love. Reading those essays now felt like looking at the diary of a different person, someone naive enough to mistake neglect for independence training and favoritism for individual attention. Around 11 p.m., my mother knocked on my door. "Emma? Can we talk?" Her voice was softer now, probably the result of the downstairs strategy session. I opened the door to find her holding a cup of tea, the same peace offering she'd made after every family conflict throughout my childhood. "I brought your favorite," she said, extending the mug with a tentative smile. But it wasn't my favorite, it was Madison's. Even in this moment of attempted reconciliation, she couldn't get basic facts about me right. "That's Madison's favorite," I corrected quietly. "I drink coffee. Have for about 10 years now." The look of confusion that crossed her face was almost comical if it wasn't so tragic. She genuinely didn't know something as simple as my beverage preferences, despite the hundreds of mornings I'd visited and made coffee instead of tea. It was a small thing, but it crystallized everything wrong with our relationship. She'd never actually paid attention to who I was. "Oh," she said, still holding the unwanted tea. Well, I could make coffee." "It's 11 p.m., Mom." And missing the point entirely. I continued folding clothes while she hovered in the doorway, clearly out of her depth. This wasn't a script she'd prepared for. "Emma, please. I know you're hurt, but you have to understand Madison needed that car. She doesn't have your advantages, your natural abilities. We were trying to help her get on her feet." There it was again, the narrative that my success was effortless while Madison's struggles deserved unlimited support. "What advantages?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear her answer. "The scholarship I earned. The jobs I worked. The loans I took out. The promotion I got through 18-hour workdays." She faltered, probably realizing how hollow her reasoning sounded when spoken aloud. You've always been so independent, she tried weakly. Because I had to be, I replied. Because every time I needed support, I was told I didn't need it. Every time I asked for help, I was reminded how capable I was. You didn't raise me to be independent, you taught me that needing anything from you was a character flaw. The conversation continued in circles for another 20 minutes, with her trying various approaches to get me to understand, while I grew increasingly certain that she was incapable of genuine self-reflection. Eventually, she gave up and returned downstairs, probably to report back to my father and Madison that I was being impossible. By 2 a.m., the house had finally gone quiet. I finished packing and sat on my childhood bed one last time, looking around the room that had never quite felt like home. The walls were covered with my achievements, honor roll certificates, scholarship announcements, Employee of the Month awards, all displayed here where no guests would ever see them, while Madison's mediocre accomplishments got prime real estate in the common areas. I wrote 3 letters, sealing them in envelopes to be discovered later. One for each family member, expressing thoughts I'd never been able to articulate before. Not angry screeds, but honest explanations of how their behavior had affected me and why I needed distance to heal. I placed them on my pillow where they'd be found when someone eventually came looking. Then I carried my bags downstairs, moving as quietly as possible. The BMW still sat in the driveway, a monument to everything toxic about this family dynamic. But I felt no urge to key it or damage it that would make me the villain in their story, and I was tired of playing any role in their drama. Instead, I got in my reliable Honda Civic, the one I'd bought and paid for myself, and drove away from my childhood home, for what I somehow knew would be the last time. As the house disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete emotional freedom from people who had never deserved the power I'd given them over my happiness. The highway was empty at that hour, just me and the occasional trucker making their way through the night. I drove in silence, no music, no podcasts, just the sound of my car's engine carrying me toward a future that belonged entirely to me. The first week of radio silence must have confused them. They were used to me being the peacemaker, the one who reached out first after any family conflict to smooth things over. But my phone stayed quiet, and more importantly, so did I. No explanatory texts, no attempts to process the situation with them, no gradual walking back of my position like I'd done countless times before. I threw myself into work with a focus I hadn't felt in years. Without the constant emotional drain of managing family relationships, I had energy for projects I'd been putting off. I volunteered for the high-visibility client presentation that everyone else was afraid to take on. I started learning new programming languages during my lunch breaks. I even began networking with other companies, just to see what opportunities might exist. The breakthrough came faster than I'd expected. The presentation I'd volunteered for caught the attention of a senior VP who'd been looking for someone to head up a new division. Within 2 weeks of leaving my parents' house, I was sitting in an office I'd never expected to reach for another 5 years, negotiating a salary that represented a 40% increase from my previous position. Meanwhile, my phone collected voicemails I didn't return. First from my mother, alternating between guilt trips about abandoning the family and attempts to minimize the Christmas incident as a misunderstanding. Then from my father, using his stern voice to lecture me about respect and gratitude. Madison's messages were the most revealing, starting with confusion about why I was being so dramatic, and gradually escalating to anger when she realized I wasn't coming back to play my assigned role. But the most interesting calls came from extended family members. Apparently, word was spreading about the Christmas incident, and people were asking questions. My Aunt Lisa called to check on me after hearing a strange version of events from my mother. My cousin Mike, whom I'd listed as an emergency contact, reached out after my parents contacted him trying to track me down. They said you had some kind of breakdown, Mike told me during a coffee meeting. But honestly, Em, you seem happier than I've seen you in years. What actually happened? I told him everything, showing him the photos I'd taken of the $2 and the BMW. His reaction was immediate and visceral. Jesus Christ, Emma. That's not love, that's psychological abuse. Having someone outside the family system validate my experience felt like being handed oxygen after years of suffocating. Mike had his own stories about family gatherings where he'd noticed the disparity, but had assumed it was none of his business. I always wondered why you seemed so tense at family events, he admitted. Now it makes sense. You were walking on eggshells, trying to earn approval from people who'd already decided you didn't matter as much. Word continued to spread through our extended network. Family friends who'd known me since childhood started reaching out, many expressing confusion about the narrative my parents were spreading. Mrs. Peterson, who lived next door and had watched both Madison and me grow up, called to say she'd been disturbed by what she'd witnessed Christmas morning and wanted to make sure I was okay. I saw that car in the driveway, she said quietly. And I saw you leave in the middle of the night. Your mother's been telling people you had some kind of crisis, but honey, from where I'm sitting, it looked like you finally stood up for yourself. The cracks in my parents' story were becoming impossible to ignore. Too many people had witnessed too many years of disparate treatment, and my sudden absence was forcing them to confront questions they'd rather avoid. Why had their responsible daughter cut contact? Why was their dramatic daughter thriving while they painted her as unstable? My new position came with interesting perks, including connections to other successful professionals. At a networking event, I met Jennifer, a family therapist who specialized in narcissistic family systems. Our conversation was supposed to be about potential collaboration between our companies, but she immediately picked up on something in how I discussed my background. You know, she said carefully, the way you describe your family dynamics sounds very familiar. Have you ever heard the term scapegoat and golden child? When I admitted I hadn't, she recommended some reading that completely revolutionized my understanding of what I'd experienced. The books she suggested described my family with eerie accuracy. The way my achievements were minimized to maintain Madison's position as the special one. The way my emotional needs were dismissed as character flaws. The way my independence was weaponized to justify neglect. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a calculated system designed to keep both children trapped in dysfunctional roles. Armed with this new understanding, I began documenting everything I could remember. Not for revenge, but for healing. I wrote about birthday parties where Madison got elaborate celebrations while mine were afterthoughts. Christmas mornings where the gift disparity was obvious but never acknowledged. School events where Madison's mediocre performances received standing ovations while my academic achievements earned polite applause. The patterns were so consistent, so deliberate, that it became impossible to dismiss them as coincidence or different parenting styles. This was systematic emotional abuse disguised as love, and I'd been trained from birth to accept and defend it. Meanwhile, my parents' efforts to contact me grew increasingly desperate. They started showing up at my apartment building, though I'd instructed security not to let them up. They contacted my workplace, claiming there was a family emergency that required my immediate attention. They even tried using Madison's social media following to create public pressure, posting about their missing daughter, who'd lost her way. But their strategy backfired spectacularly. The more they publicly portrayed me as unstable and unreachable, the more people began questioning their version of events. Comments on their social media posts started asking pointed questions about why their loving family had driven their daughter to cut contact entirely. The tipping point came when Madison made a crucial mistake. In a live stream about her new car, someone asked about her sister, and Madison laughed dismissively. Oh, Emma's just jealous because she didn't get a BMW for Christmas. She got something more practical, and threw a tantrum about it. She held up $2 to the camera. This is what responsible people appreciate, right? The video went viral, but not in the way she'd intended. Comments poured in expressing horror at the gift disparity and shock at Madison's callous attitude. Strangers began connecting the dots about our family dynamic, and suddenly my parents' narrative of the ungrateful daughter fell apart completely. That's when I knew the real reckoning was about to begin. The viral video changed everything overnight. What Madison intended as a dismissive joke about her dramatic sister became evidence of exactly the kind of family dysfunction that makes people's blood boil. The comment section exploded with stories from viewers who'd experienced similar favoritism, and the consensus was clear: my parents and sister were the villains in this story, not me. But the real karma was just beginning. My parents, now facing public scrutiny and judgment from their social circle, made increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative. They reached out to my employer, claiming I was having a mental health crisis, and trying to get them to force me into family counseling. What they didn't realize was that my new position came with an HR department that took employee protection seriously. Your family has no legal right to information about your employment, my HR director told me, and their behavior is actually concerning enough that we are documenting it in case we need to pursue harassment charges. The same parents who'd spent decades telling me I was overly dramatic were now being labeled as potentially dangerous by legal professionals. The consequences multiplied like dominoes falling. My mother's book club, where she'd been a prominent member for 15 years, quietly asked her to take a break after several members expressed discomfort with the viral video. My father's golf buddies started making pointed comments about his parenting choices. Their church community, which had always praised their devoted family values, began questioning how devoted parents could drive their daughter to complete estrangement. Madison's social media following, which had grown substantially after the BMW video, began turning on her. What started as supportive comments about her gorgeous car evolved into criticism about her character. Brands that had been considering her for partnerships quietly backed away after the controversy. Her part-time job at the boutique became uncomfortable when customers started recognizing her as that girl from the viral video. The most satisfying piece of karma came 3 months later, when Madison's BMW began having serious mechanical problems. Apparently, in their excitement to make a grand gesture, my parents had purchased the car from a less-than-reputable dealer who'd sold them a vehicle with hidden damage. The repair costs were astronomical, and since Madison had no savings and my parents were already financially strained from the purchase, they couldn't afford to fix it properly. I heard about this through the family grapevine. My cousin Mike had become my unofficial source for updates on the chaos I'd left behind. She's driving around in a BMW that stalls at red lights, he told me with barely concealed amusement. Your parents are fighting constantly about money, and Madison keeps asking them to just buy her a different car. Meanwhile, my life was flourishing in ways I'd never imagined possible. Without the constant emotional drain of managing my family's dysfunction, I had energy for relationships, hobbies, and personal growth. I started dating someone who treated me with consistent kindness and respect, concepts that felt revolutionary after growing up in a household where love was conditional and unpredictable. My career continued its upward trajectory. The presentation that had launched my promotion led to speaking opportunities at industry conferences. Companies began headhunting me for even better positions. I published articles about workplace dynamics and emotional intelligence that gained significant attention. Everything I'd been told was effortless about my success was actually the result of years of hard work finally being recognized and rewarded appropriately. 6 months after Christmas, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Mrs. Peterson, my parents' neighbor, had driven an hour to see me. I needed to tell you something, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Your parents have been telling everyone you've had some kind of breakdown, that you're refusing help from people who love you. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But honey, I've been watching you your whole life. I saw how they treated you versus your sister. I saw how hard you worked for scraps of attention, while she got everything handed to her. What you did wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. Her validation meant more than she could have known. But her next revelation was even more significant. Your parents are talking about selling the house. The BMW payments, the repairs, and now Madison's living at home unemployed because no one will hire her after that video went viral. They bit off more than they could chew financially, and it's all catching up with them. The irony was perfect. Their grand gesture designed to prove Madison's worth had become the catalyst for their financial and social downfall. The golden child they'd invested everything in was now a liability, while the daughter they'd dismissed was thriving beyond their wildest expectations. A year later, I received a letter, not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter from my mother. The tone was dramatically different from her previous communications. Gone were the guilt trips and manipulation tactics. Instead, it was filled with apologies and admissions that she'd made mistakes in how she'd treated me. I see now that we didn't appreciate what we had in you, she wrote. Madison is struggling, and we realize that maybe we didn't prepare her for the real world the way we should have. We were wrong about so many things, and we miss you terribly. I read the letter twice, waiting to feel something: forgiveness, vindication, maybe even a desire to reconcile. But what I felt was mostly indifference. The woman who wrote that letter was essentially a stranger to me now. She was apologizing for behaviors that had defined my entire childhood and young adulthood, offering explanations that came only after facing consequences herself. I didn't respond to the letter, but I didn't throw it away either. I filed it with the documentation I'd been keeping, a paper trail of a dysfunctional family system finally confronting its own toxicity. Whether their remorse was genuine or just another manipulation tactic didn't matter anymore. I'd built a life that didn't require their approval or inclusion. The final piece of karma came when Madison, desperate to rebuild her image and finances, attempted to capitalize on the viral video controversy by writing a blog about learning from mistakes and family healing. But her attempts at redemption fell flat because they focused entirely on how the situation had affected her, with no genuine acknowledgement of how her behavior had hurt me. The blog failed spectacularly, with commenters pointing out her continued self-centeredness and lack of authentic accountability. She eventually deleted all her social media accounts and moved to another state, apparently to start fresh away from the consequences of her actions. Today, 3 years later, I'm sitting in my corner office overlooking the city, preparing for a board meeting where I'll be presenting the quarterly results for the division I now run. My success isn't just financial, though the salary and bonuses have allowed me to invest in real estate and build wealth my parents never dreamed of. It's the deep satisfaction of building a life based on my own values, surrounded by people who appreciate and respect me for who I actually am. I've learned that the best revenge isn't plotting someone's downfall, it's building a life so fulfilling that their absence improves it rather than diminishes it. My parents and Madison removed themselves from my story, and that story has become more beautiful, successful, and meaningful than it ever could have been with them in it. Sometimes people ask if I miss my family or if I ever regret cutting contact. The answer is complicated but ultimately clear. I miss the family I thought I had, but I don't miss the family I actually had. I grieve for the parents who should have celebrated my achievements and the sister who should have been my ally, but I don't mourn the people who actually filled those roles. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping your self-respect? Have you experienced that moment when you realized that someone's love came with conditions that were destroying your sense of worth? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences help other people realize they are not alone in situations like this. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself and finding your worth. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to walk away from toxic family dynamics, even when everyone else tells you that family is everything. Asterisk asterisk. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of a community that believes everyone deserves to be valued and respected. From my experience to yours, sometimes the family you choose is more loving than the one you're born into, and sometimes the best thing you can do for toxic people is to remove yourself as a target for their dysfunction. Remember, you teach people how to treat you, and you're allowed to graduate people out of your life when they refuse to learn. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.